AITA for kicking out my husband's ex when she came to us with his 3 kids. I didn't know about them. One of the kid is only 5 months old. I have a lot of questions for him. My name is Kelsey, I am 32, and until this week I genuinely believed my marriage was painfully, boringly normal. Not perfect, not dramatic, just 2 adults living a quiet life built on small routines and unspoken assumptions. My husband Travis is 35, steady in the way that makes you think he is incapable of surprises, which is probably why I never questioned anything too deeply. We never talked about kids in any meaningful way. Not his, not mine, not theoretical future ones. It was one of those topics that floated somewhere in the background of married life, something you assume will come up eventually, but it never did, and I never felt a reason to push. I thought that meant we were on the same page. I thought silence meant alignment. Then this week knocked the ground out from under me so abruptly that I still feel like my body is moving a second slower than my brain. It happened in the middle of a completely ordinary afternoon. I was sorting laundry on the couch, half watching some home renovation show that had been playing for background noise, when the doorbell went off like someone was leaning on it. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I wiped my hands on my leggings and opened the door with the mindset of a person about to politely decline a salesperson. Instead I found a woman standing there like she had been holding herself together for months and finally cracked. She wasn't wild or erratic. She looked exhausted, angry in a quiet, sharp way. And she had 3 kids with her. A little girl who looked about 7 clinging to her side, a boy around 4 crying so hard his shoulders shook, and a tiny baby asleep in one of those chest carriers, his head tucked under her chin as if the entire world was soft and safe. I stared at her, waiting for her to explain why she was at my door with a whole family and that kind of fury in her eyes. She didn't stall. She told me she had been trying to reach Travis for months. She said he had not paid a single cent of child support. She said she was done being patient. She said this was his problem, not hers, and she was not leaving until he faced it. The words did not make sense. They fell into my brain like puzzle pieces from the wrong box. I remember saying something like, "You must have the wrong house." I even stepped back a little, already assuming this was some coincidence or misunderstanding that would make sense in a minute. She just looked tired of people not believing her. She said, "No. You are married to a man who is pretending he does not have kids." She said it with this resigned certainty that made my stomach cave in. The oldest kid clutched her arm harder. The boy sobbed into her jacket. The baby slept through everything like none of this could reshape the rest of my life. My hands started shaking before my mind could catch up. I told her to wait a minute, closed the door because I felt like the air inside was suddenly too thin, and just stood there staring at the grains of wood in the hallway floor like they might offer some kind of explanation. I sent Travis a text that said, "Get home now." Nothing else. I didn't trust myself to type more without breaking down. She kept knocking, not violently, just this steady pounding that felt like it was syncing with my heartbeat. She started raising her voice, saying the kids deserved better, saying she could not do this alone anymore, saying she was tired of begging him to be a father. And I just stood there, one room away from a reality I did not know existed, wondering how my life had turned into a bad movie in the span of 5 minutes. I eventually opened the door again, because I did not want to be this silent, frozen stranger in my own home. She took a step as if she thought she could come inside, and my whole body reacted before I could think. I told her she could not come in. Am I the asshole? Update 1. When Travis finally walked through the door, everything in me braced for denial, excuses, frantic scrambling, something that matched the chaos I was feeling. Instead he just stopped in the entryway, looked at the closed door behind me, listened to the faint sound of the woman gathering her kids outside, and let out this long, tired breath like he had been waiting for this exact moment to happen. He didn't ask who was here or what was going on. He just said inside the same stale calm he always used when life got messy that yes, they were his kids. The ease with which he admitted it hit harder than the confession itself. It felt like watching a stranger wearing my husband's face. My mind scrambled for something that made sense, something that could make a marriage feel real again after learning it had been missing an entire section of truth. I asked him why he never said anything, why he thought he could walk into a new marriage while carrying that kind of secret behind him. He shrugged like the whole thing was too tangled to explain, like it was just one of those complicated chapters he hoped would fade if he kept ignoring it. He said he had just broken up with her around the time we met and that things were messy. He said he wasn't trying to hide them, he just did not know how to bring it up without ruining everything that was starting between us. Hearing him say that made the floor tilt under my feet because it meant he made the choice to protect his comfort instead of acknowledging the existence of 3 actual children. I tried to keep my voice steady when I told him that not knowing how to bring it up was not a valid explanation for building an entire marriage without addressing the existence of people he helped create. His face shifted into something that looked like guilt, but it wasn't nearly as deep as it should have been. It was the guilt of someone who got caught, not the guilt of someone who understood the weight of what he had done. When I asked their ages, I expected numbers that would at least make some sense of the timeline. Instead he said he was not completely sure because he had not seen them in a long time. Hearing that tightened something in my chest that felt almost physical. The idea that a man could live beside me for years, act like he was capable of building a life with me, and yet be so detached from his own children that he could not confidently tell me their ages made something inside me break in a quiet, irreversible way. I did not yell. I did not cry. I felt like I was moving through water, slow and heavy, trying to understand how I was supposed to stand next to someone who treated his past like clutter he could hide in a back closet. He kept standing there waiting for me to soften or ask him what came next, but all I felt was this clear, cold refusal growing in my chest. I needed space, distance, silence, anything that wasn't him. I told him to stay at his brother's place for a few days because I couldn't even look at him. Update 2. The next morning felt strangely quiet, like the house was holding its breath along with me. I kept expecting Travis to text or call or try to explain himself again, but the only sound that broke through the silence was my phone buzzing with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it ring out, because the last thing I wanted was another surprise tied to his mess, but something in me pushed to answer. It was Danielle. Her voice was flat, exhausted, stripped of the fire she had the day before. She said she was at a government office trying to finish the paperwork for child support enforcement and the caseworker told her she needed Travis's employment information. She didn't have it. He never answered her messages. The only number she could find that led to anyone was mine. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling this mix of resentment, shock, and something almost like responsibility swirling together in a way that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. She wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. She was trying to take care of her kids. And the person who was supposed to help her had vanished into another life he built on silence. I do not even know why I agreed to meet her. I don't know if it was guilt or curiosity or some instinct to understand the mess I had married into, but I got in my car anyway and drove. The waiting area was the kind of place that feels heavy even when it is clean. Rows of plastic chairs, old posters on the walls about rights and resources, the constant shuffle of people trying to solve problems they didn't create. And there she was, sitting with a baby strapped to her chest, the older two pressed against her like they had learned to orbit her for stability. She looked different than the woman who stood on my porch. She looked drained in a way that felt bone deep, as if she had been fighting too many battles at once for too long. Seeing her like that loosened something inside me I did not realize had tightened. The middle child held onto her leg like it was the only thing keeping him upright, and the oldest was doing that careful, practiced routine of entertaining the baby with small gestures and soft touches. It was the kind of behavior you only see in kids who have learned responsibility from necessity, not from adults preparing them for it. I had barely looked at them the day before, too shocked to process anything more than Danielle's voice, but standing there now made everything feel painfully real. I sat beside her and asked quietly how old they were. She answered without hesitation, like she had repeated those ages to doctors, schools, offices, strangers, anyone who needed to categorize her children before helping them. When she got to the youngest and said 5 months, I felt something jagged catch in my chest. 5 months. That meant this child was born well after Travis and I were married, not before, not during some distant past he could try to reframe, but while he was living with me, sharing meals with me, planning holidays with me. It wasn't a forgotten chapter. It was a parallel life he kept sealed off until it forced its way into ours. A cold, sharp kind of anger spread through me, the kind that sits low and steady instead of erupting. It wasn't just about lies anymore. It was about the fact that he had let a woman carry this entire burden alone while he pretended to be a stable husband in a home he built on omissions. I looked at Danielle again, not with defensiveness this time, but with the recognition that she had been trying to survive something I had unknowingly been benefiting from. She wasn't hostile now. She gave me this tired, sympathetic look, like she understood I was standing in the wreckage of the same lie, just from a different angle. That moment made yesterday replay in my mind, the way I shut the door on her because I didn't understand what was happening and needed to protect my own reality. Now it felt different. Now it felt like refusing to see the truth had only delayed the inevitable. Standing beside her in that chaotic waiting area, listening to those children fuss and cling in a way that spoke of years of instability, I felt the full weight of what Travis had done to all of us. And now I couldn't unsee any of this. Update 3. Travis showed up later that evening with this stiff, uneasy posture, like he was rehearsing calm but could not quite land it. He said he wanted to talk, and for a moment I stood in the doorway wondering how a conversation with someone I used to trust so easily could suddenly feel like negotiating with a stranger. The moment he stepped inside, the air felt charged in a way it never had before. I tried to start with something controlled, something that would keep me from spiraling, but the second I asked him why he never told me he had a 5-month-old child, the whole facade he had been holding cracked straight down the middle. His face didn't sink into remorse or quiet regret. It collapsed into full-blown panic, the expression of a man whose carefully constructed story finally fell apart in his hands. He said the situation had been complicated for years, that his relationship with Danielle had been one long disaster he never knew how to untangle. He rattled off this list of chaotic moments, arguments, separations, reconciliations, the times she blocked him on everything, the times she showed up again, the moves she made without telling him. He kept circling back to the same point, repeating that he genuinely did not know whether the baby was his, and hearing him say that on loop made something twist inside me. He acted like uncertainty was some kind of justification for silence. He said he did not want to bring chaos into our marriage before he had answers. He said it like it was reasonable. As if hiding a potentially newborn child was better than acknowledging the possibility that he had one. I told him that hiding a maybe child was still hiding a child, and he tried to argue that he had only wanted to protect me, to keep our life clean until circumstances settled. But the more he talked, the clearer it became that he was not trying to protect me at all. He was protecting the version of himself he had presented, the responsible husband who looked steady and put together because he had cut away every inconvenient truth that made him look human and flawed. I asked him when he had last seen the older kids, and the way he stared at the floor told the answer before he spoke. It had been over a year. A full year in which he had not reached out, not called a lawyer, not attempted any kind of scheduled visitation, not even followed through with the basic obligation of child support. He said Danielle made everything difficult, but all I saw was a man who let 3 small lives slip into the background because it made his own world easier to maintain. Hearing him say it out loud, that he simply stopped trying, broke something in me that had been hanging on by a thread. It wasn't just the cheating or the lying or the secrecy anymore. It was the realization that he was capable of walking away from his own children and still building a calm, comfortable marriage with me like nothing was wrong. I didn't see a complicated situation. I saw avoidance dressed up as helplessness. When I told Danielle what he had said, she reacted with a steadiness I wasn't expecting. She said she wanted a DNA test. She said she was ready to pursue legal action because she was tired of being dismissed. And I couldn't find a single rational reason to disagree. I felt no impulse to defend him. Nothing in me tried to soften what he had done. I didn't even feel shock anymore. Just a dull, heavy numbness settling into the space where trust used to be, as if I was finally seeing the version of my husband that had been there all along, hidden behind the quiet life we built. And I didn't argue, didn't defend him, didn't even feel shocked anymore, just numb, like I was watching the real version of my husband for the first time. Update 4. The DNA results arrived faster than I expected, sealed in one of those plain envelopes that somehow carry more tension than anything dramatic. The moment I saw it sitting on the counter, that familiar cold heaviness settled in, the kind that shows up right before reality hits hard enough to rearrange your understanding of everything. I already knew the outcome wouldn't land gently. You do not get to stand inside a situation this tangled and walk away with neat answers. Still, holding that envelope felt like holding the last piece of a puzzle I never asked to solve. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I picked it up, and the weight of it felt disproportionate to the paper inside. It was the kind of moment where even the quiet in the room seemed too loud, where the refrigerator humming in the background suddenly sounded like static in my ears. I stood there for a long time, staring at my name on the front as if I could will the truth to soften before it reached me. But it never does. Not with things like this. We opened it in the same government office where this whole unraveling seemed to live now, under fluorescent lights and tired voices, with people shifting in uncomfortable chairs and babies crying in a way that blended into the background like part of the building itself. Everything about that room felt too exposed, almost clinical in its lack of softness, but it matched the moment too well. When the worker handed over the paperwork, the air changed. The page spelled it out clearly. The two older kids were unquestionably his. No margins of doubt. No wiggle room. Just the truth laid out in scientific language that didn't care about excuses or timelines or the fragile stories adults tell themselves to soften guilt. Seeing their names next to words like probability of paternity, 99%, made the reality snap into place in a way nothing else had. And then the last line hit, the baby wasn't his, and for a moment everything went quiet in a way that didn't feel like calm, more like exhaustion finally cracking open. It was a silence that didn't soothe. It just made the truth echo. Danielle didn't react the way I thought she would. There was no shouting or shaking or dramatic collapse. She just let out a long, quiet breath that felt like a release she had been denied for months. It was the kind of breath that comes from someone who has spent too much time bracing for impact, someone who learned to live in survival mode while hoping the world might finally give her something solid to stand on. She looked at me with a kind of weary gratitude that wasn't loud or theatrical, just real and raw in a way that made my throat tighten. It struck me how deeply alone she had been in all of this, how she had carried the burden of confusion and anger and responsibility without support from the one person who should have stepped up first. She thanked me more than she thanked him, and that told the truth of this entire mess more clearly than any printed document ever could. I had shown up. He hadn't. I wasn't the one who had children with her, yet in that moment she trusted me more than the man who fathered two of her kids. Travis's reaction made my stomach turn. The moment he saw the line confirming the baby wasn't his shoulders dropped in this visible wave of relief that felt like watching someone wipe sweat off their forehead after barely avoiding a consequence. He looked almost proud of the outcome, as though the universe had just exonerated him from all wrongdoing. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was something worse, an almost triumphant ease, as if one result erased everything else that had been exposed. The two older kids, the ones he actually helped bring into the world, barely registered in his expression. It was as if the only thing he saw on that page was a technical escape hatch. He seemed ready to latch onto it, ready to reshape the story in his head into something that made him the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of neglect. I watched the realization hit him that he could use this as ammunition, as justification, as some twisted confirmation that he was the wronged one. He started stumbling into that narrative almost instantly, as if the script had been sitting in his back pocket waiting for a chance to be used. That narrative fell apart the second I reminded him that genetics didn't change the fact that he had ignored two confirmed children for over a year. There was no world where that wasn't abandonment. He didn't pause to absorb it or reflect. He went straight into self-preservation, like someone scrambling to build a wall out of excuses before accountability could reach him. He said it was Danielle's fault. He said she moved without telling him, blocked him, unblocked him, changed numbers, made things impossible. He said the paperwork was a maze, the legal system unfair, the circumstances against him from the start. He threw blame at everything within reach, everything except the one truth that mattered: he never tried. Update 5. I didn't leave him, even though every instinct in my body wanted to grab a bag, drive until the highway blurred into nothing, and let the silence swallow me for a while so I could think without being surrounded by the pieces of his lies. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was and told him that if he wanted this marriage to continue, it came with one condition that wasn't flexible, negotiable, or open for interpretation. He had to take responsibility immediately. Not when things settled down. Not after he gathered himself. Not when life felt less overwhelming. Now. The moment the words left my mouth, I could see the resistance forming behind his eyes, the same pattern he always fell into when confronted with something that required actual effort. He pushed back instantly. He said the payments were too high and he couldn't manage them with the way our bills were structured. He said he didn't trust the system because it was designed to squeeze fathers dry and reward mothers for weaponizing the courts. He said he worried Danielle would take advantage of him or twist the situation to get more than she needed. He said he needed time, as if years of running from the truth somehow entitled him to a grace period. None of it mattered to me. I let every excuse fall flat. I told him that if he wanted this marriage to have a pulse, He had to prove he could at least do the bare minimum for his own kids, and I felt every syllable of that line settle between us like a final warning. I decided that if he wasn't going to be proactive, I would remove every possible obstacle he could use as a shield. I sat with Danielle and helped her file every form correctly so there were no clerical errors he could point to, no missing signatures he could pretend he forgot, no misfiled documents that could give him an excuse to disappear again. I learned more about child support enforcement than I ever thought I would need to, navigating deadlines and requirements and follow-ups with a determination that surprised even me. Danielle didn't expect anything from me, but she didn't fight my involvement either. She had been alone long enough to recognize help when it finally arrived. When the state picked up the case and the numbers became official, something in Travis's expression changed. It was the look of a man realizing he had run out of exits. He still fought it at first. He complained non-stop, pacing the living room like the universe had personally wronged him. He said the calculations were unfair, said the state didn't understand his situation, said he was being punished for trying to move on with his life. He grumbled through every adjustment, every deadline, every reminder, but none of his protests stopped the process. The payments still began. They were deducted automatically, pulled from his income before he could even touch it, and the first month he saw the deposit slip he looked stunned, like he had finally met a consequence he could not charm, deflect, or outrun. And now? He pays on time. Every month. No disappearing acts. No stalling. No muttering about taking care of it later. He complies because he finally understands that doing nothing is no longer an option, not with the state involved, not with Danielle holding firm, and not with me standing behind him expecting something better than the man he used to be. It isn't some miraculous transformation. He didn't suddenly become a deeply devoted father. But he is doing what he should have done from the beginning, and for the first time, those kids have something reliable in their lives. Things are calmer now. Danielle has steady support and doesn't have to chase him through a maze of silence. The children have a foundation that isn't shifting under their feet every month. And he is learning, not gracefully, not quickly, but steadily, that responsibility does not vanish just because he ignored it. And me? I am still here, watching everything, making sure he never slips back into the version of himself that caused all of this. It is not perfect, but it is stable, and right now stability is enough for all of us.